Well, hello everybody, and thanks for watching another episode of AdventureQuest RC, where we take the RC outside. But I'm inside. Well, as you know, with anything mechanical, sometimes it needs a little maintenance. So today we're going to take the SCX10 and take apart the motor. Right now we're experiencing quite a bit of pressure required to turn these wheels, which means that it actually doesn't go as fast as it used to. And so we're going to take apart the motor, just clean up everything, take the comm stick to it, make sure everything's working the way it should, and then put it back together. If necessary, I'll take apart the transmission and the diffs, which I need to do at some point anyway, but I might save that for a different episode. But for today we're going to just take apart the motor, and I will teach you how to do your maintenance on your motor. It is a brushed motor, so yes, it does need some maintenance. So unfortunately, some days you're going to have to spend inside and not outside, but that's rewarded with awesome experiences outdoors, right? So thanks for watching, and get ready for a wild ride. Okay, well, first things first, we're going to go ahead and take off the tires and wheels. Normally you don't need to necessarily take off the tires and wheels, but I prefer to have a much lighter vehicle, and since these tires are saturated with water, it's just going to make a mess. So I'm going to pull out my handy dandy screwdriver, which I know I'll probably get yelled at for using, but you know what? It saves me a lot of time, and for that, it's worth it. Now, to remove this motor and transmission assembly from the chassis, all it takes is to unclip those wires and flip it upside down, and now we have 4 bolts. And after you unscrew those 4 bolts, the transmission should just drop down. These drive lines are actually a 2-piece assembly, so this should just slide out, and we shouldn't have to do anything with the drive lines as far as alignment or any other screws. We should just be able to pull off these 4 screws and pull off this transmission motor assembly. So let's get to it, shall we? Okay, we have all 4 screws unscrewed. So now all we need to do is lift the motor up. And it's as simple as that. The motor and transmission assembly is just that simple. Now we have an extremely light chassis. Just kidding, I'm not going to throw it. Okay, now what we need to do is take the motor off of the transmission assembly, and that's going to be fairly simple as well. It's going to require 2 bolts to take off this dust cover. Oh, actually 3 bolts. I apologize. Okay, now what we have is a pinion, a spur gear, and the slipper clutch. The slipper clutch just allows for any sort of binding that might happen with the tires to disconnect from the motor, or the motor's power to disconnect from the drivetrain rather. And the reason for that is if you're under a lot of power and all of a sudden your drivetrain stops, if you didn't have a slipper clutch, it would apply all the force of this motor to the drivetrain, which could end up breaking parts. So we have a little bit of a slipper disc in the back there, and how it works is you have this spring here, and this spring applies pressure against this plate, and that plate slides against this slipper disc, that little clutch plate. And then from on the other side of that, it presses against this gear, which then turns, right? So the motor turns the gear, and if something's bound up here, it has to go through the gear, onto the slipper clutch, gets past this plate into the actual drivetrain itself. It's a pretty ingenious system, pretty straightforward, and that's how it works. So now let's go ahead and pull this motor off with these 2 bolts, and that's it. Now, when we assemble this, we have to make sure that we take extra precautions and make sure that the mounting is correct. And what I mean by that is the actual spacing between the motor and the transmission, or the pinion and the spur gear. The best way to do this is to grab firm on the pinion or the spur gear, either way, and so hold one firmly and then kind of move the other one back and forth. You should see a little bit of movement. You'll hear a little tick, tick, tick. You probably can't hear it on the camera, but you'll feel it move back and forth. And then rotate 90 degrees, do that again. And do that 4 times. And the reason you want to do that is not every time is the spur gear 100% round. A lot of times they'll make these spur gears and they're off round a little bit. So they can be oblong, and so you might be loose on this side, but really tight over here. And then so what you want to do is you want it to be loose on the loosest side, but you don't want it to be tight on the tightest side. So I go to the tightest side there is and try to get just the minimum amount of looseness you'd want to see. And hopefully you won't breach the maximum amount of looseness on the other side. If you do, you may have to replace your spur gear, and that's fine. So let's go ahead and take this motor off and move to the next step. Now we simply have a motor. Well, upon dismantling the motor from the transmission, it appears that the motor is just fine. I went ahead and spooled it up to see what we can find as far as any extra funky, weird noises, and well, there wasn't really any. So I'll show you here. This is a little sketchy because I'm taking two exposed leads and putting them next to each other on the battery. So this could end up badly if you're not careful. But if you're careful, this is a good way to test it. Now when I apply this power, it's going to want to jump. And when it jumps, you want to make sure you have some pressure, otherwise it's just going to dance on the table. So positive and negative, notice how the wires actually have them reversed. That's okay. It's just going to spin the other direction. All right. I don't hear anything funny. I don't smell anything funny. I think this motor is actually good, which is great because I don't see any access to the brushes to be able to adjust the brushes. So that's unfortunate. Looks like this is going to be a one-time use motor, and I'll end up having to get another motor. I'm sure there is ways to access it by bending these tabs out and pulling it apart, but the point is to show you how to actually maintenance it if you don't have that much experience with anything technical or RC related. So we'll just skip past that aspect of it right now. I'll go buy another motor and show you how to do maintenance on a brushed motor instead. But for now, since we know that's okay, let's go ahead and take this transmission apart just to see if there's anything else that could be binding this up. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to bottom out the screw. But when we bottom out the screw, we want to count how many turns. So we're going to start here and we're going to count. Half turn, one turn, half turn, one turn. Okay, so that's 2 full turns down, so screwing it in. So now when we take this apart and we put it back together, we know we need to tighten the screw all the way down and then back it off 2 turns, and then the spur gear slipper clutch should be adjusted properly. Now when you're taking apart anything, of course, you want to make sure that you take your time, make sure everything's the same length there is, if there is any discrepancies, there is, and every time you take something apart, try to do something that reminds you how to put it back together. So in this case, we know that this comes together like this, right? Okay, that's good. So I'm gonna put everything down on the table the same direction, so I'll remember when I put it back together which direction it was. It's just taking your time, going slowly. Just rock it back and forth, okay. There's a little bit of grit up in there, but that's not terrible. Okay, so this is probably part of the problem. So I've been noticing that the truck has been harder and harder to move lately, and I think I just found the culprit. This bearing here, when I try to move the inner race, which is this piece here, inner race and the outer race. The races are what holds the bearings in place, the outside and the inside. This doesn't want to spin freely. If this isn't spinning freely, what's happening is it's simply rotating and spinning on this piece of metal, which is fine, but when it gets hot, it's not going to want to do it as easily as it is right now. Plus, it's just going to add a lot of premature wear. So that is the problem as to why the SCX10 has been a little more sluggish and the tires sometimes just don't want to rotate. At least that's part of it. I'm going to continue to look and see if I can find any other bearings that happen to have any problems, and if I do, I'll replace those as well. So now, pull the shaft out, take a peek at this bearing. This bearing is experiencing the same thing. Not quite as severe though. So what I'm noticing is that I can take this and rotate the outer race, and the inner race stays there like it should, but then it starts to get a little more difficult. And it's that difficult part that I'm concerned with. So this bearing shot as well. So that inner race is just sliding on the metal. It's not actually rotating. So what that means is that this bearing, even though right now this is spinning freely, if there's any pressure, it's going to just spin on the metal and it's not actually going to act as a bearing. It'll act more like a bushing. So this is the way it should spin. The inner race, see how it's actually sticking to the shaft? Now conversely, now look at this one. See how the inner race is actually spinning with the gear and it's not sticking to the shaft like you would expect. This is what's causing this truck to be so slow. Well, hey guys, thanks for watching. I sure hope you learned as much as I did today. Started out this video thinking it was just going to be this bad motor, but turns out the motor is not that bad at all. In fact, I do hear a little bit of bearing noise, but in this motor, I don't really like the motor too much. It doesn't have really easy access to the brushes without any special tools, so I'll probably replace it with a Tekin 35 to be perfectly honest with you. But in this case, it's good enough to keep using. But what we found out was that the bearings were the culprit. The bearings, these little tiny bearings. That was the reason why I wasn't able to go very slowly with precision. Like I'd go over a rock and it would just kind of be jerky. You know, I couldn't go quite as slow. I definitely couldn't go as fast. I was having shorter run times, which with this vehicle, that's crazy saying that. And then on top of that, even when I unplugged it, I couldn't hardly rotate the tires. So it turns out the bearings are bad in the transmission. And that means that that's probably not the only thing that's bad. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the hobby shop tonight, order some bearings for the transmission, and I'm going to order bearings for the differentials and the axles, because if these bearings are bad, most likely those bearings are going bad too. So next Thursday, what you're going to see is you're going to watch me disassemble those axles and differentials, and you'll learn how to maintenance those as well. Replacing those bearings is pretty cheap in comparison to having to deal with other parts that break or just the bad experience that you had. You want to get out there and have fun outside, right? You don't want to be stuck in here all the time doing maintenance. So do maintenance every once in a while, put new bearings in it, and just go out there and have fun. So get outside, go enjoy RC, and hey, if you've enjoyed this channel, feel free to subscribe. If you like the video, feel free to like it. Do whatever you want to with it. I don't care. I'm doing this for fun. I don't get paid for any of this stuff. I just enjoy making videos. I enjoy RC, and I enjoy encouraging people to get out there and have fun. Get away from Netflix, get away from YouTube, and go play with your RC car. Thanks for watching, guys.